Well, welcome to Tim's Take, and this week we have two very special guests. Our first one is our MU Associate Professor, Dr. Ron Revord, who's also the Director of the Center of Agroforestry.
That's right.
All right,
Thanks,
and that's pretty new. That's in September.
Yeah, as of September. Yeah.
All right, but we also have a guest, is Dr. Tom Molnar from Rutgers University, where he is an Associate Professor in Biological Sciences. And the reason Dr. Molnar is on because he is the expert on hazelnuts. And Ron, you grow a lot of hazelnuts for research, don't you?
At the Horticulture and Agroforestry Research Farm near New Franklin.
That's right. That's right. But so let's get some background on hazelnuts. So that's a native plant, isn't it?
There is a native plant. There's Corylus americana, which has native range coverage across many states in the eastern half of the U.S., so east of the Rocky Mountains.
Okay.
Then there is the commercial form of the species, which is typically the European hazelnut.
Okay, so we have the native and the European.
Right.
So which one are we consuming the most of?
The European.
Okay, all right.
The nuts on the American species are generally pretty small, and they're in thick shells, so a little bit removed from commercial characters.
Tom is the breeder, correct?
Tom is the longstanding lead of the breeding program at Rutgers University.
Now, are you breeding some too?
We are in collaboration with Tom
through
the Hybrid Hazelnut Consortium, which also includes Oregon State University and has included Arbor Day Foundation and, Tom, correct me where I'm wrong, University of Nebraska at Lincoln?
Yeah.
All right. So, in hazelnuts, Tom and I were talking before, they're used a lot in our confectionaries. Mm-hmm. That's the major use for them?
I believe that would be the largest percentage of the global market.
As far as I'm aware, there's some of the kernels that do go into different snack items as roasted hazelnuts, but I think the majority of them go into either candies or nut butter spreads with chocolate most of the time.
Now, are those all roasted even in confectionaries? Are those roasted hazelnuts?
Yes, those primarily would be roasted.
Okay. Because we ate a few when we were out in New Jersey. I thought they tasted pretty good by themselves.
Yeah, and at the chestnut roast, maybe you snacked on a couple.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they are different sizes and what have you. And
there's a lot of variability in shell size, kernel size, but typically, as I've learned from Tom, the confectionery markets can have size preferences depending upon what kind of value-added, like chocolate product they're going into.
Well, chocolate and anything tastes good.
Most definitely.
So in the confectionery market, that is a big business then with the nuts in it.
Yeah.
Do people also have the same type of allergies with hazelnuts as they do with peanuts and some of the other ones?
Yeah, I think chestnut can stand aside and not have the same kind of allergy issues. I'm not giving medical advice.
Oh, sure.
Hazelnuts, I think, are lumped into the same kind of allergy concern. Yeah.
All right. One of the things that surprised me when I was out in September at Tom's place and his research and how big the plants were. Because I always thought of a hazelnut as a small shrub out in the woods.
That would be the native species, which can grow in a forest understory where it's in light limited conditions. Sometimes not being the most fertile soil or managed. Mm-hmm. But the European species is usually pruned as a tree or maybe a shrub with just a couple stems and can get exceedingly tall, 30, 40 feet tall,
and live for decades.
Yeah, we've traveled in France for an agroforestry World Congress and seen 40-year-old orchards, 50-year-old orchards.
Well, I think that's one of the big differences between our native hazelnut in the U.S. and the European species is the size of the shrub that it creates. But there is variation across even the European species. So the ones that you had a chance to see at Rutgers were some of the larger ones were probably close to 20 years old and would be good representative plants of the European. But the ones that are grown in Turkey, where I should note that probably over 60% of the world's crop comes from, those are actually smaller shrubs they've been selected to be harvested by hand. So they're more of a kind of weaker growing form of the European species, whereas the ones we had at our Rutgers farm are more of like a Northern European style or Italian style growth habit, where they could easily be 25 feet tall.
Well, that's interesting. You talked Turkey and Italy, and that's where your harvest equipment came from that you were using.
That's right. Those are really the long-term centers of hazelnut production or commercial production, and they do have some really interesting smaller scale machine factories there. Unlike in the United States, where our hazelnut production is in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and typically very large farms, hundreds of acres, where in Italy you may have smaller plots, and they have equipment designed there to handle those smaller plots. So that's where we have to go to get our equipment.
Sure. So Ron, you're going to here in central Missouri in the River Hills.
That's right.
So are they doing pretty good?
They've been growing really nicely. We have, this coming year, our first plants, most are breeding selections that have come from either Tom's program or Oregon State University, where Sean Mellenbacher has been the lead until this past year. Those 5-year-old plants are dwarfing us now, as 5-6 foot tall researchers going in. They're 6-8 feet tall, and we'll have our first really heavy cropping year next year. We might have had more of a crop this year if it weren't for the cicadas in the 2024 season. Would it have been?
It just set them back a little bit.
They'll basically do the lesions they make on the stem, right, cause 24 inches of dieback on all the stems.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. Well, Hank was telling us they wasn't gonna hurt anything.
I'll let you take that up.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, because those lesions, I can see that.
The plants, it wasn't fatal. It was just a stress they endured for that year, and it probably took away the vegetative growth that would have carried all of the buds that would have taken all the pistillate flowers in 2025.
So mentioning the flowers, don't they bloom super, super early?
Yeah, it's kind of different than you would expect. So walnut and chestnut and pecan, they all set their flowers after bud break occurs. So bud break will start to occur vegetative in April to May. And then flowering will happen thereafter. Hazelnuts, it's the other way around. You see these little pistollets occur with pink stigmas come out anywhere from January to as late as April too, right, Tom?
It can go, not typically for us here in New Jersey to April, but I think in colder regions, all the way till April, you might see female bloom. So it's a winter blooming crop, which is unusual, I think.
So here in February or so here in Missouri, or
probably on average, yeah. So January to March, yeah. And then the male catkins, so like the long-looking, male flowers start to elongate during that time period too, and get bright yellow and shed the pollen. So it's abnormal, right?
Yeah, it is. It evolved over for some other reason, didn't it?
Yeah, that's a question beyond me. I guess I don't know the evolutionary advantage of a winter flowering temperate tree nut, but
I like to think, and of course this is conjecture, but there's no leaves blocking the flow of pollen at the time. So if you think about a forest canopy, that would allow pollen, which is windborne pollen, to travel farther. So maybe exploiting some sort of niche to get pollen to move farther.
Sure.
You can make up any story for evolution over millions of years. I've been asked that question a bunch of times, and there's no leaves blocking pollen flow, so maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Being in the understory compared to the other temperate tree nuts, that tracks. Yeah.
So you also told me, Tom, out at Rutgers and before we came on the air, that you just can't plant one. You got to have multiple ones and maybe even different varieties of hazelnut.
It's not terribly unusual for plants that they are self-incompatible. So you do need a compatible pollinizer partner to go in the orchard. But one of the big challenges with hazelnut is this winter blooming, and it's really responsive on the temperature and on how the climate changes throughout that winter season. So in some winters, you can have a really stretched out bloom period, and you might have two partners in the orchard, but they might not, the pollen shed may be not in sync with when the female flowers emerge. So to really have a successful orchard, you need to actually have what we call early, mid, and late blooming pollen sources or pollinizers to go with your main crop cultivar to match the female flowers. So it from the breeding standpoint, it becomes a little bit of a challenge, or I would say even a big challenge, because we have to identify multiple cultivars or varieties that we release to farmers. But then we have to also explain to farmers a complex orchard layout that they need to have in place in order to have success. So I won't say we figured it all out, but Ron's working on the same thing in Missouri as we are here in New Jersey, trying to study not only compatibility of bloom, but the timing of bloom so we can have the right partners.
And the stability across years, right? So you were speaking towards this, Tom, right? But since it's winter flowering, warm periods, and the time in which they occur during the winter time. So those 2 weeks that we get the 50 or 60 degrees here, that's what throws a monkey wrench into actually developing a reliable pollen or set of a reliable pollinizer or set of pollinizers for a particular production cultivar.
And to make new varieties, are you making specific crosses or what?
So we're starting to get to the point where we have the plant material base here that's mature enough where we can make control crosses, but we've relied on partners like Tom or Sean Mellenbacher at Oregon State to send us seed. Tom could speak to the crossing efforts, which have been pretty extensive, that they've made at Rutgers over the past 20 years.
We have been making hand pollinations between different parents, like targeted parents, to achieve our breeding goals here at Rutgers since the late 1990s. But we've also collaborated with Oregon State University since that time, building on their breeding program, which was initiated probably maybe 20 years prior to us at Rutgers. So we do have an extensive library of plants where we know the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, and what their traits are, and we can pick parents to try to fill in the gaps of what we're looking for. Whether it's more durable resistance to eastern filbert blight, which is something we'll probably talk about, or new unique S alleles, so we have more pollen partners in the orchard, or of course kernel traits. So we have a lot at our disposal now.
You mentioned that these were understory trees, but we're growing them out in the wide open. Is there an issue with that?
We take some precautions at establishment where we use a water-based paint to cover the stem, especially when there's not a lot of foliage on the plant, to prevent like sun scald, like breakages in the stem material.
You might better classify them as sort of an edge species instead of like a deep forest understory species. So you find them on like forest edges, roadsides, borders of farm fields, where they can take full sun, but they also can tolerate shade. But if you have too dense of shade, then they really do limit the amount of flowers they produce. So we found at least a European species, which has been domesticated. It's been grown for well over 1,000 years in Europe. Performs really well in full sun. Minus what Ron is talking about is that sun scald in the winter, where I would say they're not maybe fully adapted to our climate here, where we could have warming during the winter while it's still potential to go well below freezing. So.
Yeah, because the East Coast and the West Coast, they're tempered somewhat. We're here in the Midwest, we're not.
So typically hazelnuts are produced in like a Mediterranean-like climate.
Right.
So like the big U.S. industries in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. Mm-hmm. I think that's Zone 8. And it obviously has very different seasons other than just the winter cold temperatures compared to here. Tom is in a fruit growing belt of New Jersey. There's been adoption in the Great Lakes, like Ontario has quite a bit of adoption, or buffered by large, winter temps and in summer are buffered by large bodies of water. We're still a little bit removed from that, but we're a shorter step into the Midwest from those environments that I described compared to a lot of our neighboring states in the Midwest, which have, like, you just go a little bit further north and Iowa or Illinois, the hardiness zone is much more unforgiving to the plant materials.
Because we're 6 now, aren't we, through here?
Yeah, 6B, yeah.
And I think Rutgers is in that same 6, because I was surprised that they were as warm as they were. New Jersey.
It's interesting because part of the state has been reclassified to Zone 7, and where we're doing the research is Zone 7.
7, okay.
But a little south, and away from the ocean, it's still Zone 6. I think a little part of New Jersey there. And when we started the program, it was Zone 6, but it's Zone 7 now. So and we have winters, I think, that are very minus the constant rain, but the temperatures are not too different than the Willamette Valley. And we can see bloom that goes from December all the way, into March, which is similar to what they see there. And if you compare it to a more cold climate, many times bloom will actually be compressed, and you might not see it until like the end of February, and then it warms up, and then you have 2 weeks of bloom or 3 weeks of bloom. But I think maybe in Missouri, Ron, you'll be finding some years will be like that, and other years will be, more like the upper Midwest where it's very, very cold, and then all of a sudden bloom happens for 5 days, and then it's over.
Are the yields pretty consistent compared to our mass plants that are up and down each year?
So there can be some alternate bearing here, but we're getting to a point where we have, through a lot of Tom's work, have selections or even recently released cultivars where now we know which, genotypes to invest long-term and well-managed, replicated yield trials or orchard-level yield trials. So I know Tom's starting to see some of this data at Rutgers, which he could speak on, but we're establishing like those kind of trials now, or as of the last few years we have been, so we could really see under especially different fertility and irrigation regimes, what kind of alternate bearing we see. I don't think it'll be as extreme as like pecan and black walnut, which can sometimes be, 0 and 1, or at least effectively so. But Tom's been sending me some yield data from some of his releases of late, and maybe he could speak to that.
I think that we're going to see some differences when you have a really big crop year. It'll be followed by a lighter crop year. But traditionally, hazelnut was grown as a very low input crop. And if you look at Turkey, it's really low input. So what I think research is showing is if you grow these plants under those really low input conditions, it pushes you towards that biannual bearing where you have a big crop year and then the plant exploits all of its resources. And then the next year it's lighter. They in fact produce less flowers. They produce them the year prior to the cropping season. And if they don't have the resources at the time of flower set, then they tend not to produce them. So if we're seeing with more consistent irrigation, better fertility, and even foliar fertility is something we've been experimenting with, we can balance more of that biannual bearing and get a more consistent crop. And I think in Oregon, they're really showing that, especially with the new cultivars, that cycle is that masting type cycle of more native species has been, I think, toned down quite a bit in breeding.
So if I have different varieties with different maturities, wouldn't that mask some of that masking too, where they'll be more consistent as a whole orchard goes, not individuals?
Possibly, if you have like some genotypes in your orchard that have more even yield, it could kind of level off any that are more biannual. In theory.
Right. So what kind of yield should we be looking at on hazelnuts? What would we look at? I guess it depends on the year of establishment.
So we like to look at probably going to years 7 or 8 to when the significant crops start to come in. And about that time, at least what we tell our growers here in New Jersey, we would expect about 10 pounds of nuts per tree. And we plant probably about close to 250 trees per acre, maybe a little less than that. So if everything's working out right and you get good pollination and you have healthy trees, you're looking at over 2,000 pounds of nuts per acre at that year 7, year 8 mark. But they continue to increase in yield as they age. So as you get into the 10 to 12 year mark, then you could easily get into like over 15 pounds to 20 pounds. And then we have yields on trees that are 20 years old that are well over 50 pounds, reaching one of our record trees this year had over 70 pounds of dry in-shell nuts. So the potential is significant, but it does require proper pollination, and then fertility resources are met, and just orchard maintenance to keep the trees healthy and happy.
So what kind of return per pound should a grower expect?
So that's probably a moving target right now,
sure,
because the industry is so young in these different areas. There's going to be a lot more like direct and local marketing, and Tom knows what kind of numbers he's getting from his farm's crop, which are probably good proxies for that. And then there's some movement on value-added processing in these different areas, so that folks, these sort of smaller operations or small farms or collections of farmers are getting more dollars at the farm gate. But if we're not trying to bury the lead, the commodity price out of Oregon, which, hubs of adoption in the eastern half of the United States need to grow more in volume before they could probably feasibly access, is right around it fluctuates depending on how big the Turkish crop is, but it probably is around $1 a pound, plus or minus 20 cents on average. Is that about right, Tom?
It can reach up to close to $2. I think now we're over $1.50. We would have to look to be more accurate, but it unfortunately fluctuates quite significantly based on what happens in Turkey.
Sure.
If they have a frost event in Turkey and their crop is reduced by 25% or more, then that's going to reduce the overall world crop, and it's going to affect prices, and that could be really good for U.S. growers. But if Turkey has a really like a mass year crop, a giant crop, then that reduces the price per pound.
This is a year where the price is probably a bit higher than historical averages because of a lower supply coming out of Turkey, or at least I guess now it's not projected. We're late in the year, but
so our growers are trying not to look at the commodity pricing of hazelnuts and to really develop local markets where we can try to get the highest dollar value per pound based on being local and also being fresh. A lot of the times, I would say a majority of the times, the hazelnuts that if you go to a local supermarket to buy hazelnuts, they actually come from Turkey, and they can be 1 year old, they can be 2 years old. And the quality, while they're still edible and they do taste like hazelnuts, I won't say they're terrible, but they're not very good compared to really fresh, locally grown hazelnuts with good post-harvest care. And the flavor profile is just extremely different. And our growers are hoping to kind of exploit that quality difference and not really sell them as an alternative or comparison, like 1-to-1 for like imported kernels, but like a new approach to hazelnuts here in like New Jersey or the Mid-Atlantic region.
Is if you don't mind, Tim, is your price point in like the $12 to $16 range for a pound of kernels?
What we sell to restaurants and candy shops, just raw kernels, and we sell them for $12 a pound.
Okay. Versus $1.50 for a
commodity.
So here we are. We're recording this
in-shell commodity.
In-shell.
So that's raw kernels, so cracked.
Okay.
In-shell commodity. Yeah.